Okay, Chapter 18, Fire Cause and Determination. Our objectives with this chapter is we want to talk about the common causes of fire and explain when to request for an investigator. We'll talk about how to find the point of origin of a fire, and then we'll talk about legal considerations of fire cause and determination. An investigation is conducted to determine how a fire started. It's important that we know the who, what, where, and when, that we know how a fire started, when a fire started, and where. Most of the time, this is required by state law, and it is a requirement that is set forth, and it's under the responsibility of the fire chief. Some text will read authority having jurisdiction, but a lot of the old state law will have the fire chief is responsible for determining each cause. And in that language, it will also state that he or she is responsible for determining that cause or their designee. So they can designate someone else within the department to work under them as well. Understanding the cause, this helps us to basically prevent future fires. And it will help determine if any criminal acts were involved in the process. So the incident commander is responsible for conducting the investigation overall. And usually this is the highest ranking fire officer that's on the scene. The legal responsibility for conducting the investigation is defined by state or local law or regulations. And this is what I was talking about in the earlier slide, that this is usually designated to the fire chief or their designee. So let's look at common causes of fires. A relatively small number of causes are responsible for a large number of fires. We look at cooking fires, 42%, so we can see that that's the highest one on the list, and that's for the most part where our problem is. And the second biggest one that we encounter is heating at 17%. And this is the use of, could be wood burning, it could be kerosene stoves, and it could also be electrical heating type devices. Most often we find the problem there is an electrical heating device has been used in conjunction with an extension cord, whereas they're only designed to use the cord that is made with the device. On down the line, we have about middle of the ways at 5% smoking. Clothes dryer problems at 4%, which the problems there seem to be that we don't clean lint traps out very well. And then the little bit lower and bottom of the list is playing with heat sources or playing with fire. When do we request an investigator? The fire officer should determine the point of origin and try to come up with a probable cause. On small or routine incidents, this is the only investigation that is really needed, and that's all that you're going to have to do or conduct. A set of guidelines explains when to request for an investigator. Anytime that there's a death or a serious burn injury involved, then we want to get an investigator involved to help us come to a definitive conclusion on point of origin and the cause. Deliberate fires are fires that we have or see as certain evidence that would suggest that it was deliberately set. Large loss fire, a large property or dollar figure loss, it's best to get an investigator involved. And anytime there's a possible crime, people will use fire to cover up crimes. And so we see this a lot in the fire business. Growth and development of fire. To determine the fire's point of origin, the fire officer must understand fire behavior, fire growth, and its development, and the three methods of heat transfer, which we know are conduction, convection, and radiation. Disabled built-in fire protection This may be encountered in fires involving industrial or commercial occupancies. Look for damage or vandalism, such as sprinkler hookups that have been damaged, any hose cabinets that's been vandalized or damaged, hardwired smoke detectors disabled, and even high-rise communication systems that have been damaged. Delayed notification or difficulty getting to a fire. We need to be alert for conditions that delay the fire department's ability to get to and begin to extinguish a fire, such as malfunctioning keys or key cards. Again, we can encounter vandalized doors, materials that were purposely caused to block access, and points of origin in the attic, the basement, or a closet. Equipment that's been altered or tampered with. Document unusual findings and conditions. Indications of forcible entry prior to us. And that's one of the things we've got to become astute to and good at, is paying attention to what things look like before we force a door, for an example. Pay attention, remember what you're seeing. Altered electrical devices and the use of excessive fuels. Sometimes we see certain patterns as well that will clue us in that flammable liquids may have been used. And this is the times that we suspect criminal or we suspect a deliberate set, and so we want to get a fire investigator involved. Legal considerations. As fire officers who investigate the fire may be called to testify in court, and so because of that, we may be challenged on issues of proper procedure. We may be challenged on issues of qualifications, and so that's why it's important that we meet all of the qualifications for Fire Officer 1. We meet all of the qualifications in our recertification trainings and those kind of things. Searches. Typically, no search warrant is needed to enter the fire scene or to collect evidence and determine the cause of the fire. Usually the state laws are written, and this is the case for Kentucky, but it is written that once the fire department has been summoned and called and they're on scene, the property is now owned by the fire department until the investigation is complete, and then it is officially turned back over to the property owner. So by law, we have a right to be there. Once we've been called, we have a right to extinguish the fire at that point and to investigate all causes of that fire. A warrant is required after the fire origin and cause have been determined and we have left the scene. And if there is a need to come back, then we'll need a warrant, an administrative search warrant, or we may need also a criminal search warrant, depending on the situation. This is one of the reasons, again, why under these circumstances that we want to get a fire investigator involved, because they are trained and bonded, and they can get, on the law enforcement side, they can get who they need involved to get search warrants. Securing the scene. If the fire officer suspects a crime has occurred, then we will immediately request the investigator, and then we want to secure the scene and maintain custody until that investigator arrives. So that means we have to cordon off the scene and keep everybody, including the property owners, out until we can make the determination of the cause and the origin and start answering some of those questions. So, and during these times, we have to document anything that we remove during extinguishment and overhaul process, where it was, and maybe even begin to take pictures. Evidence. We know evidence is the material objects and statements that are admissible as testimony in the court of law. Demonstrative evidence. We have documentary evidence and then testimonial evidence. And your investigator and your firefighters, fire officers will offer up some of that testimonial evidence as to what they saw when they got there, the things that they did, where they applied water and provided extinguishment. Artifacts can include the remains of the material that was first ignited in the area and the spot of origin, then the remains of the ignition source itself. So if there is evidence in the remains of that, then those are the items that are going to get tagged in and collected and stored as evidence. An item on which fire patterns are present. So when we see pour patterns of a flammable liquid, as an example, that item, whether it be floor decking, carpet material, that material may be cut away and bagged and or put in cans to preserve the evidence so it can be further tested for hydrocarbon, flammable liquids, that kind of thing. So we got to protect our evidence. The investigator's goal is to identify the point of origin and the cause. The fire scene reconstruction, or recreating it, the physical scene before the fire occurred, is our goal, and this can either be in theory or physically. A lot of times fire investigators will take what they physically have left and begin to, once they remove and literally sweep and shovel out the debris that we have caused and the fire have caused, we will begin to put things back, and we will look at burn patterns on walls. We will begin to look at the charring of wood materials, the destruction and the degrading of furniture, carpet, and those kind of things, and start to make a determination of the who, what, where, and when. The investigator must locate, examine, and preserve the evidence. The fire officer must determine when to stop firefighting operations as a part of this effort. So once we get to that situation and we realize that we have possible evidence that could be collected, then we're going to need to change our approach a little bit during overhaul, and maybe even do less overhaul and try to keep everything put out and at bay until the investigator can get there and let them guide us on, what to further put out and what to tear up during overhaul and what not to. So obviously with fire investigation, as a fire officer, you're going to be, responsible for getting this started and making the appropriate calls to investigators. And you can spend a whole lot of time learning fire investigation and experience with it. Good investigators have been doing it for a long time, and they see different things as they go along the path. And so it's up to us to get things started. And when it becomes more complicated than our ability, then we need to go ahead and call for help. Our big concern and goal is to prevent future fires. It's important to understand what causes them so we can prevent them in the future. It's our job as officers to be able to determine that point of origin and cause. And if we can get close, and when we need help, call for that fire investigator. The investigator must take into account a citizen's rights. We have to follow the law, and as fire officers who suspect a crime should request a fire investigator. They have the authority, the fire chief has the authority as well to make arrests, to make determinations, and involve the proper law enforcement. There's 3 types of evidence, again: demonstrative, documentary, and testimonial. The fire scene reconstruction involves recreating the scene before the fire occurred, and this can really be a long and drawn out process. Usually it is. It's time consuming and it takes a lot of effort, and the fire investigators usually ask for our help when this is going on. Certainly this is not a fire investigation class. This is just one little piece that, as a fire officer in the first level, that we need to know the ins and outs of. And you're going to be faced with looking at and determining the areas of origin and the causes of fires. And when we need help, call for that investigator.